there are a lot of attempts to show that homosexuality is biologically predetermined. They're looking for a gay gene or a biological predetermination. But the fact is, they have not come up with a conclusive biological or genetic foundation. There is suggestive evidence, but there's nothing conclusive at this point. Yeah, homosexuals can change, and that's what we do here. This is a clinic of 8 therapists, myself and 7 other therapists, and we work toward changing men and women who want to come out of homosexuality. My staff is 7 therapists, and we have 1 woman on staff. She deals with the lesbians, and the others are men who work with the men. You see, one of the reasons why a lot of people don't believe or cannot believe that homosexuals can change is because we're not seeing these individuals coming forth and telling their story. The only story we're hearing is, I am gay, I didn't want to be gay, but I realized I was, and now I accept myself, and this is what they call the coming out story. Okay, but we need to hear about another kind of coming out story. And this other kind of coming out story is a person who says, I had these feelings, I had these attractions, I was told I was born gay, I was told that I didn't have a choice, but then I discovered that there were things that I could do by understanding myself, by understanding my childhood, by looking at particular things that happened to me. I began to understand what my sexual attraction was about. And now I am no longer gay, I am no longer living in a gay lifestyle. Here is my wife, here is my family. Now we need to see more of those stories. One of the arguments against the ex-gay is, well, he'd never really changed, he's just suppressing, he's denying his true feelings, he's pretending to be heterosexual. But in fact, when you listen closely to these people and listen to their testimony, listen to their story, they experience a reduction in their same-sex attraction. I'm not saying that there is no more zero homosexual attraction. There may be a little bit left. But these individuals do not need to live their life around their homosexuality. These are people who are choosing to get married and have families, and they experience an authentic sexual attraction for their wife. They experience a significant reduction in their homosexual attraction. We do this work all day long. We work with 135 cases a week ongoing, and I can tell you people do change. I never really chose to go into this kind of work. I never gave it serious thought. I never gave it really serious consideration or study. But I saw a number of individuals who had come to me, and they had these sexual attractions, these homosexual feelings, but they did not want them. It was in contrast to their faith. It was a contrast to their religious beliefs. And so we began to look at understanding them. I had no understanding of the condition, but I saw that they all had a hurtful relationship with the father. They typically had over-involved, intrusive, domineering mothers and distant, detached, or critical fathers. And we began to do this work, and I began to develop an understanding of the treatment, and of course doing some literature review and reading and studying, and I began to see a pattern. While they are looking for a gay gene, the fact is that there is much more scientific evidence for what we call the classic triadic family dynamic. Triadic in the word triangle. In one corner you have the over-involved, intrusive, domineering mother. In the other triangle you have the distant, detached, or the critical father. And then in the other triangle you have the temperamentally sensitive, introverted, artistic, timid, shy boy. Now that might be a temperament. The boy might have been born with a biological temperament, as I've just described it. But that doesn't make a homosexual. What makes a homosexual is that this temperament now is influenced by the mother-father family relationship and pushes this boy from temperamental sensitivity to same-sex attraction. And that is what we focus in on. One of the things that make the treatment of homosexuality difficult is often in the lives of our clients there is an addiction to same-sex attraction. Pornographic, especially internet today, is a big addiction. And they can get onto the gay websites, they can see the pornography. The sexual availability is so incredible today. So one of the problems that we have to address in the course of treatment is the addiction to sexual activity, what we call the impulse. And that is part of the problem. There are other factors that could contribute to the cause of homosexuality. Usually an older brother, if the older brother is very strong and dominant and he's the star in sports, and this particular client is timid and shy and artistic, that could be a factor. You want to get the older brother to work with the younger brother. You want to get the older brother to really align himself and build the little brother up and make him feel good about himself. Also, peers are very important. Other boys that he is in relationship with, you want to make sure that he has a good relationship with them. Also, sexual abuse is another factor. Sexual abuse by an older man can also be a factor. But none of these are as important as the early relationship with the father. Because if he has a solid relationship with the father, then he's not going to be too damaged by his older brother. He's not going to be too damaged by his peers. He's not even going to be damaged by same-sex abuse from an older man if he has a solid relationship with his father. I can tell you that at our clinic alone, about 1/3 of our clients report being sexually molested by an older male or a teenager when they were very young. So there is a connection. However, that in and of itself does not make a homosexual, because there are many heterosexuals who engage in sexual activity when they were very young with an older man and they become heterosexual. How come? The answer seems to be that if there is a need for father's love and there is an emotional emptiness, then these men come along and offer love but really give sex. So sex gets connected with love. And so that emotional need gets filled with sexual addiction. And that seems to be the patterns that we have seen over and over again. The fact is this: it's been over 30 years that the American Psychiatric Association and the American Psychological Association normalized homosexuality. Okay. During these 30 years, there has not been one psychological model of development of the child that leads to homosexuality unless you traumatize the child. If the boy experiences, and the girl too, if the child experiences a particular kind of trauma, a traumatic rejection, that boy is likely to become homosexual. If you do not traumatize a child, he will be heterosexual. That's the reality of it. The child is capable of becoming a homosexual or a heterosexual, but it's our responsibility as parents and as educators to take these children and direct them toward their natural, biologically determined gender, which is heterosexuality. The therapeutic approach is always positive. Okay. In fact, to be honest with you, we never tell our clients not to have homosexual activity. If they want to do it, let them do it. It's up to them. Our job is to help them understand what they learn from it. When the client comes in and says to me, I had gay sex last night, my only question to him is, what was going on with you just before you decided to act out? What was your psychological state of mind that made you want? That's where the lesson is. So we don't tell clients not to act out. They could act out, but every time they do act out, it's an opportunity to learn something about themselves. The course of treatment is to understand the origins of your homosexuality. If you are homosexual, it's not because you were born this way, but because certain things happened in your childhood. And it's for them to understand what those patterns are. We don't have to tell them. All they need to do is explore their childhood, and they'll see for themselves that there was a hurtful experience with a father or a father figure. Over-involved relationship with the mother. They begin to understand that their homosexual impulse, their desire to have homosexual sex, is preceded by what we call the gray zone. The gray zone is feeling empty, feeling lonely, feeling apathetic, that's why we say gray zone. You know, it's like a dead zone. And that is preceded by somebody did something to make you feel bad about yourself. Someone shamed you, someone humiliated you, someone said something to make you feel lesser than who you are. And that sets you up for homosexual enactment. And we're teaching people that homosexuality is not about sex. It's about how you feel about yourself as a person. It's about your self-esteem. It's about your self-identity. It's about the way you relate to other people. Whenever I present this model of the cause of homosexuality, many people will say to me, you know, that perfectly fits alcohol, drug, any other kind of addictive behavior is always preceded by feeling bad about yourself. And it does fit into the literature of addictions, of many different kinds of addictions. It's the same pattern, except these clients of ours were traumatized regarding their gender. And that's what makes the homosexual different from all other addictions. That their trauma, their childhood trauma, had to do with their being boys, being masculine. Well, there were earlier claims that we have no scientific evidence for our therapy, but that was years ago. But since then, we've done some of our own publishing, which is, I'm not going to go through the details with you, but I can tell you that today there is much more published scientific evidence for the treatment, the successful treatment of homosexuality, and certainly the Spitzer study, which is a very important study, because Spitzer is not coming from a religious perspective. Spitzer himself was the hero of the gay community because he was the one that helped to change the 1973 decision to normalize homosexuality. And he was the man who afterwards found 200 people who overcame their homosexuality, 150 men and 50 women. And not only did they leave their homosexuality, but they made a positive transition to heterosexuality. And other studies are coming out too. The greatest threat to the gay movement is the testimony of an ex-gay person. When an ex-gay stands up and says, I was once homosexual, but now I am happily married, that is the greatest threat to the gay agenda, because fundamental to the promotion of gay is the idea that you're simply born this way, you have no choice. But when you can show that choice is possible, it totally upsets the foundation of what we understand to be gay. Well, I think that right now in the school system, when a young student goes to the counselor and says, you know, I have these feelings and these attractions, what shall I do? The counselor says, oh, you were born gay. You have a gay gene. That's all there is to it. There's no scientific support for this, but this is the popular misinformation we're giving young people. So these kids have no hope for change. What we are hoping can happen is that the counselor can say, look, you can either accept your homosexuality or you can try to change. Change is possible. People have overcome their homosexuality, and you might want to consider the possibility of overcoming your homosexuality. That is a fair way of treating these young people who are looking for information. They're not being told that they have a choice. Well, one of the pieces of advice is go out and experiment and find out what you like. Well, this is ridiculous. I mean, what kind of a choice is this? First of all, if the young person has these feelings, he's going to engage in homosexual activity. He's going to like it because sex feels good. And that's going to only deepen his identity as gay. It's going to deepen his conviction that this must be who I really am, because sex always feels good. And that's going to limit his possibility of considering change in the future. I can tell you that one of the factors in predicting treatment success is the amount of sexual activity, the amount of sexual experiences. The client who has had less homosexual experiences does better in therapy, because you don't have to worry about that addictive dimension that we talked about. And the one who has had a lot of sexual experiences, it's going to be more difficult for him because his body is ready to kick into that. Here at this clinic, we can claim a third, a third, a third. And by the way, this fits most of the research on the treatment of homosexuality. It's about a third, a third, a third. A third, no change. A third, significant improvement. A third, cure. Now let me explain. When I say a third cure, I do not mean that this person will never have a homosexual thought or feeling again. If it does come up, he will understand what it's about. He will go to himself and say, okay, what's going on with me right now that I should be feeling these attractions? How am I doing with my friendships? How am I doing with my wife? How am I doing with myself? So his mind goes there. See, homosexual temptation is a signal to go back to yourself and check in with yourself. When we say no change, we're talking about that 1/3 of people who were forced to come to us. They did not want to be in therapy. Their parents dragged them into therapy, or their wives dragged them. They were not motivated. But usually when people are motivated, they will experience significant change in understanding and diminishing their homosexuality. My oldest client is 64, and my youngest is 7 years old. So I'm going from 7 years old, because he is showing what we call GID, gender identity disorder. He wants to be a girl, so we're working with the family. And the oldest is a 64-year-old man who had no idea that he had a choice. He had no idea that change was possible. And he is doing really very well, actually, because luckily he did not have that many experiences. He did have some, but he didn't have too many homosexual experiences. And he's also very motivated. For some people, homosexuality is an adaptation. That works for them. They want to pursue a gay lifestyle. They certainly have the right to pursue a gay lifestyle. We are available for those who want to change. We are available to those who say homosexuality for me is a maladaptation, and that's the population we want to work with. Not only is the APA changing now, but APA changed before 1973. We have to understand, if we're going to follow the words of the APA, then we have to consider that before 1973, homosexuality was always a disorder. Always a disorder. The three greats in psychology, Jung, Freud, and Adler, the three greats, all saw homosexuality as a disorder. And it has been consistently seen as a disorder until one day in 1973. What happened on that day? Was there a big scientific meeting? Was there an understanding of no, there's no new evidence presented. Suddenly it was a political decision. And so in one day, 150 years of literature was wiped away. Young people are not being told they have a choice. They're being told they have a gay gene, that they have gay DNA. This is certainly not true. This is certainly misinformation, and we're doing a great injustice to young people when we encourage them to go into a gay lifestyle, when we encourage them to go engage in gay sex. Try it, see if you like it. What kind of advice is that? The most ridiculous advice you can give anybody. And yet we're being told this. And these counselors are doing it with good intentions. They really believe that there is a gay gene. They are being told this at the educational level, and they repeat it. In 1972, we heard that the gays were going to use the 20th anniversary of the 1973 decision. They were going to use 1993, the 20th anniversary of the 73 decision, to completely outlaw the treatment of homosexuality. We heard about this, and so a number of psychologists and psychiatrists around the country who do this kind of work decided to come together and to support ourselves and to support clients to preserve their right to receive treatment. And that's how North was born in 1992, the year before the 1993. And in the beginning, they dismissed us, they ignored us. The strategy of the gay activists, the strategy of gay psychiatrists within the American Psychiatric Association was to ignore us. Well, they couldn't ignore us. We kept growing and growing, and we continue to have an influence. We have a very strong and well-written website with excellent scientific information. We're very careful that what we put on our website is scientifically grounded. It's not religious, it's not political. We have a national conference every year, which is very well attended, excellent speakers. We're making inroads. We're making inroads, and we cannot be ignored. And today we have over 1,000 members. So we're doing very, very well.
In the United States?
All over. We're having North chapters all over the country. We have North Switzerland, Italy, Canada, Mexico, I don't even know where else, Spain. I mean, we're just growing. We're growing. The world is designed for male and female. And it's not homophobia, it's just that's the way things are. And children, if you leave a child alone and don't traumatize him, he will be heterosexual. 98% of the population is heterosexual. So chances are it's easier to live as 98% of the population than it is to live as 2% of the population. That's the reality of it. Now, we're certainly not talking about gay bashing or hurting people or diminishing their civil rights. We certainly don't want to advocate that. But the reality is that this is a heterosexual world. When the client walks in, if he says to me, I am here because my church wants me to change, or my Bible wants me to change, or my family wants me to change, that client is not going to do well in therapy. They have to come because they want to change. Most of the people that come to us say, homosexuality just doesn't feel true. It's not that it's right or wrong in the moral sense, but when I engage in homosexual activity, there's something false about it. There's something dissatisfying about it. That is the motivation to change. Well, most of the conversation we've been having here is about male homosexuals, because that's most of the clients we deal with. And there seems to be more male homosexuality than female homosexuality. Some studies say 5-to-1, some say 3-to-1, one study says 11-to-1. We don't know exactly, but we know that there is more male homosexuality than female homosexuality. And that might be because the boy has to disidentify with the mother and connect with the father. See, he has the additional developmental task of doing this. The girl maintains her identity with her mother, and from that she develops a feminine identity. But the boy has to do this other particular step. So, while we've been talking about male homosexuality, we might want to consider for a moment lesbianism. Now, lesbianism could be a little more complicated, and there are three basic causes in terms of development. So let's start with the earliest development. The first one is this, what we call the symbiotic or infant relationship, where the baby girl is attached to the mother, but there is a breach or a break or a breaking of the emotional connection with the mother. The mother is attuned to the baby, but maybe she's going through a psychological problem herself, or she's going through a crisis, or she's having trouble with the father or the husband, and so she makes a disconnection. So the baby experiences this loss, this drop of attachment. So it's intermittent connection, okay? So there's this hunger for the mother figure, which they discover later on. Growing up a little longer, we go to another kind of problem that the girl might encounter, which is a gender problem. And this is like the male homosexual. For the lesbian, she disidentified with the mother and bonded with the father. See, she did what the boy should do. Now, why would a girl disconnect with the mother and bond with the father? Well, sometimes you have a family dynamic where the mother is passive and weak and emotionally unavailable. Yeah, and the father is very, we say seductive, not sexually seductive, but very a large personality. He's charismatic, he's salient. You might have a situation where the father is abusive to the mother, and the girl says, if this is what it means to be a female, to be weak, to be victim, I'm going to identify with dad. And in fantasy, she becomes daddy's little boy. This is identification with the aggressor. So she basically, in fantasy, denies her feminine identity. And this is the more masculine type of lesbian, the more butch type lesbian. And very often this lesbian type will connect with the first type that's looking for a mother figure. So you'll have the passive feminine type, and then you have the more masculine type. So you have two different types. Then we have a third cause, which is a girl who might have been sexually molested by a male. And so for her, she has a phobic reaction or a fearful reaction to male sexuality. And for her, lesbianism is it's a safe place for her to go. But that is more like a trust issue. It's not so much a fundamental issue. And that usually has the best prognosis in therapy. Those are the three basic types.